Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Natalie Himmelrich. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is completely self-funded, produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. Consider making a small donation to support the podcast. Go to bit.ly/support, capital G, capital T, and podcast. I repeat, bit.ly/supportgt podcast. Thank you so much. And for more information, please visit Natalie's website, join the podcast Instagram page, and subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates on future episodes. Those people who are informed in Polyvagal Theory probably don't need any explanation, but basically in my life, Deb Dana's influence had first started with her publications and her online workshops, through which she allowed me the insights into Polyvagal Theory from the standpoint of therapist. Then I had the privilege of meeting Deb personally during the Polyvagal Conference in Berlin, an experience that deeply impacted me both personally and professionally. Her work on the Polyvagal Theory resonated with me and has been before already on a profound level, offering new insights into the connection between the nervous system and emotional well-being, specifically in my area of passion and the intersection of grief and trauma. So Deb's compassionate approach and groundbreaking research helped me understand the importance of creating safety and connection in the therapeutic setting of people who are bereaved or traumatically bereaved. Her influence has shaped my practice, allowing me to support my clients more effectively, while also guiding my own journey towards greater self-awareness and emotional resilience. So as I said, if you're familiar with Polyvagal Theory, Deb Dana doesn't need any introduction, but as always, I'm going to start here with her professional biography. So about this week's guest. Deb Dana is a clinician, consultant, author, and speaker. Her work is focused on using the lens of Polyvagal Theory to understand and resolve the impact of trauma. She delves into the intricacy of how we can use an understanding of the organizing principle of Polyvagal Theory to change the ways we navigate our daily lives. Deb is well known for translating Polyvagal Theory into a language and application that is both clear and accessible, and for her significant contribution pioneering rhythms of regulations, methodology, tools, techniques, and practices which continue to open up the power of Polyvagal Theory for professionals and curious people from diverse backgrounds and all walks of life. Deb's published work include the Polyvagal Theory in Therapy, Polyvagal Practices Anchoring the Self in Safety, and the Polyvagal Card Deck, and her latest book, which I think is the latest, Anchored: How to Befriend Your Nervous System Using Polyvagal Theory. And we can find as always, these links all in the show notes. So it's my deep pleasure and honor to have you here. Welcome, Deb. How are you?
Thank you. It is so lovely to be face-to-face again. It's nice that we had a chance to meet in Germany, and now we get to land here together, which is lovely. Yeah.
So as always with my guest, I start by asking the first question, which is, tell us a little bit how your life was shaped by grief and trauma and how it has played a part in your life to become who you are, where you are today.
So it's been a fascinating journey. My professional journey around trauma has been going on for many years. I'm a clinical social worker with a specialty in working with complex trauma. So, it's in that realm. I've been helping clients on their own trauma healing journeys for many, many years. I've always loved moving into that exploration. I think when you become a clinician and decide where you want to focus, something draws you, right? Like you're drawn to the intersection of trauma and grief for a reason. I was drawn to trauma. And in the beginning, I wasn't quite sure why. We all have our own trauma. I had done a lot of my own work and really done a lot of resolution of my own trauma, but there was something that drew me into the world of trauma and helping others navigate that journey. And along with trauma certainly comes grief. So, grief with my clients, but, more recently, my own grief journey has come into play, and it feels different, right? When it's your own personal journey, you live it differently, and you feel it differently than when you're working with someone on their journey. I do think it's interesting. I think that even though I've really accompanied so many people on their own journeys, that I could do it from an even deeper place now, because
Absolutely.
in my own process, which is fascinating, right?
Mm.
To think, oh, now I understand it differently.
Yeah.
Right. I embody it differently. So, and I think, as I reflect on trauma and grief, they're intertwined as well for me in my personal world. My husband, Bob, had a stroke in 2015, and I think that was the beginning of a trauma grief journey, that
Mm.
there was a before and after moment that happened. And even though the after there was a lot of work and a lot of recovery and a lot of, sort of moving forward and then getting, stopped and complications, it truly was an ongoing trauma grief journey until, he died in September of 2023. And then it feels like it's a different grief, right? It's somehow again, trauma and grief, but different, because there's again, another moment when he's no longer here, and the caregiving has stopped. Caregiving is such a difficult thing to do, as and probably most of your listeners know, that caregiving is hard work. And, that ended when he died. And yet the grief is, it's a different grief, but there's so much grief, and it's a different grief journey. So it's probably grief journeys, right? Yeah.
So you alluded a little bit to the work that you did on your own trauma. That's obviously something brought you to this area of work, and with your most recent loss of Bob, in the sense of the physical death. And you also mentioned the caregiving, which in the time difference of a stroke, 2015, must have started. I don't know if it was immediate intensive care. You're nodding.
Yeah. Interesting, because, and I wrote about the beginning stroke recovery journey through the lens of the nervous system in the book that Steve and I co-edited. And it really was for me. And I will forever be grateful for being a polyvagal informed therapist. Polyvagal theory has really supported me in moving through all of these experiences in a way that I could manage, right? That I truly trust my nervous system, and trust that it is taking me where I need to be in the moment. So in the moment, of Bob's stroke and how life changes, I could see his recovery through the lens of the nervous system, which was helpful. But I could also interact with the medical world in a different way, and I could sit in my own regulation and try and navigate Bob's early recovery, his early rehab. He was in inpatient rehab for a number of weeks, learning to walk again, learning to come back to life, so to speak. And so the caregiving began then. And as you know, grief and trauma impact in very different ways. For me specifically, I had a full-time clinical practice. And the day after Bob had his stroke, I cut my practice in half, because I had to have half the day with him. And so and I will say my clients were so kind and so loving and so understanding, right? Which again was a lovely sort of connection, feeling in the world of it's okay. Right. Because as a clinician, you feel responsible for your clients. And I couldn't carry that responsibility for all of my clients. I just didn't have the hours in a day any longer. So, all the changes that happen immediately, they are traumatic. And then later on, as you look back, you can feel the grief of the loss, of the change but in the moment, it's just traumatic. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
and you just have to keep on going and keep moving through, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And the same was true, I think, at the end of his life when, I live in Maine. Our home is in Maine, and we also have a place outside of Chicago. And the question became at the end of Bob's life, we were in Maine and we're supposed to go back to Chicago. And the question was, where do you want to die? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to be in Maine. So he stayed here in Maine where I am now. And then, of course, when he died, everything around here changed.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Oh, now this place feels, um, haunted in some ways, and yet filled with good memories. It's that mixed things, right? But for me, I could follow the guidance of my nervous system, right? And my nervous system was in a sympathetic doing place. That's what kept me going. I didn't have time to stop and feel everything that was going on because I couldn't find that place of regulation and slowing down to do it. My sympathetic fight or flight system was so active, and it was active in the let's organize, let's do what needs to be done, let's do some clearing out, let's move things around. And then it took me to my other place outside Chicago because it was, you have to get out of here, actually leave here for a while. And so that was sympathetic. And so that was that sense of everything was shattered and you have to manage in some way. Right. So that's sympathetic. And then when I got out of this environment to my other place, my dorsal collapse came into play. Right. Where there were days when I would spend, all day in my pajamas doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was okay. Again, because I can follow what my nervous system needs, I knew that my system simply needed to just shut down for a bit. And truly the trust that it would come back to life. Right. But if from the outside looking in,
Yeah, exactly.
someone might have looked at me and said, oh, she's depressed.
Mm-hmm.
We need to do something.
Yeah.
Get her out of that depression. Thankfully, my children are all sort of steeped in polyvagal theory with me because they've heard it so much. And they would check in and they really got the message. Mom's okay. She just needs some time. And they would, do the, check in, stop by, whatever, but not the pull to get you out of that. And I think that's one of the lessons I'm learning and would like to share with other people, is that the nervous system knows what it needs. And yes, if it had gone on for, 6 months, that's a different story. Maybe I'm stuck in survival. But, the days or even the weeks in the beginning, the nervous system is really wise and knows when you need to be in the doing mode, fight, flight, doing, or in the dorsal, collapse, disappear mode. And it will take you to moments of the ventral, able to feel safe and connect with the world. And in the beginning, there were just small moments, but they were there. And I could say, oh, yes, it's still there. Just not ready to really spend hours and hours there yet. Right. And people have read my first book, yet's my favorite word. Right. You just put yet on the end of any sentence. So that was helpful for me too. Not ready yet. And I'll get there, but not yet. And I think it was that self-compassion and that true belief that the nervous system will find its way that allowed me to survive those first few months with some sort of grace, or not feeling so lost, but knowing I'm on a journey with my nervous system.
You shared beautifully the understanding of what your nervous system needed in that moment. And I think looking at my clients, on reflecting on what they're saying, or also guests on the podcast, it is the question of that confusion about where they're at. Because usually after loss, what people shared with me often is, I feel like I'm going crazy, or I don't know what to do. And when I hear you, even though you were describing I was in my pajamas the whole day, there's still this sense, this part of you knowing this is okay because it's a state and the state will shift again and I will go through other moments again.
Yeah. 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 And I think, the practices that I've created for clinical work, I really relied on many of those same practices, those same ways of exploring in my own journey. That we do this practice called the story of three states, where each state, that the dorsal collapse and hopelessness, the sympathetic, fight, flight, have to, should place, and the ventral connected, safe, okay place, all have their own story.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I've done that practice with clients for years. And I do this practice for myself, fairly often just to stay in touch with it. And in those days, I could go to that practice and go, oh, right. I might be in the dorsal, hopeless feeling, lost place, and listen to that story. And then I could also touch into the sympathetic action taking story and the ventral okay story, right? So even though I wasn't in them, I could remember they're there and I could invite them into language, into to hearing them. And that's again a beautiful reminder that we are doing this all the time. We are forever moving through variations of our stories. And that was helpful. So again, the things I'd been practicing were so helpful
Mm.
in those early months. It's been a little over 10 months now, and I still find that, I have I have ventral days when it feels like, I'm doing okay. Right. I can remember the fun times, and I reminisce with my family, my friends who all knew Bob, and we
Mm-hmm.
share funny stories. And then there are other days when it all feels too much, and other days when I get really activated and make the to-do list and have to get through. So you can feel all the difference, and that's pretty normal. It feels,
Mm.
yeah.
And
Mm.
I can only assume, but you haven't told the whole story, but you mentioned your children and Bob. I also assume, correct me if I'm wrong, that the story that you had with Bob was many, many, many years. So you just being 10 months after his passing is getting used to what does my life look like without Bob in my life, which has been part of my life for so long. What am I doing? Who is me in the world without Bob?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Bob and I were together for a little over 20 years. So,
Yeah.
and um, he was stepdad to my kids,
Mhm.
and then grandkids, and it's so interesting to sort of hear the things that everybody remembers. Everybody remembers something different, right? And the grandkids will often, talk about, grandpa would have liked this, or grandpa this, which is fun to feel, his presence is still here. And yet, I'm still holding on to his death, his actual, not his dying. His dying, I can sort of be with differently. I'm beginning to feel the ways I can hold on to him, take him with me when I go places, when I travel to teach. I think, oh, Bob would have liked this, or we were here together. So I'm finding my way in the world as a solo traveler, so to
Yeah.
speak. Um, his actual death I still hold in a way that doesn't feel settled yet. So again, they're different layers, aren't there?
Mhm.
They're the actual events that can pull you in some way. There's the framework that changes as to how you're living your life. One of the things that feels really weird to me still is that I go to make a decision about something, and there's no one to ask.
Yeah.
Right. And it's sort of, it's freeing, right? Because it's like, I don't have to think about how does this impact, any other people, or, what do Bob and I need to do together. So it freeing in that way. It also feels sort of untethered, like there's nothing, being held in the world. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Another guest that I had is Mary Frances O'Connor, who wrote the book The Grieving Brain, and she expresses how the brain works on predictions. And so it's like these 20 years of prediction that have been built. When you make a decision, you talk to Bob and you talk about how does that feel. Even if you made that decision on your own, you still have someone to reference that with. And then your brain says, okay, let's talk to Bob.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, well, how do I do that now that is not in the physical world?
Yeah, and I think it's complicated for if you've also had many years of caregiving, because there's a before stroke Bob, right? Then and that memory is finally coming back, because when you're in the caregiving role, it's hard to remember what was before, right? So there's the before stroke Bob, and then there was the Bob that needed care.
So there was like 8 years of caregiving.
Yeah,
and that's an intensive time.
And then there's the, I think of the dead Bob, and now there's going to be another Bob that's going to sort of emerge from all of that. So it's interesting to sort of be allowing or inviting that. I find if I strive for it, if my sympathetic system, tells me I should or I have to, that everything goes off track. As we know, that's a survival strategy, right? And survival strategies don't mix well with, this journey and coming into a place of feeling organized in a new way, right? I think that really feels, again, on a nervous system level, my nervous system is reorganizing.
Yeah.
Right. And as my nervous system reorganizes, my stories change, my feelings change, my behaviors change. We know that. We know that's what happens on a level when the biology changes, all those things change. And I'm just reminding myself my nervous system's reorganizing. I'm creating some new patterns. And as that happens, I'm curious about the behaviors, the thoughts, the feelings, the beliefs, the stories that are going to emerge from there. So again, it's been a time of remembering and really trusting in, the lens of the nervous system, and then being so delighted to see how it actually, is working.
In Berlin on the conference, I remember the last section where you spoke about, you so beautifully described the process through the different nervous system states, and you shared a little bit. But I'm assuming that some of the people listening, they don't know what we're talking about, and they hopefully might be interested, because honestly, this has completely changed my outlook, not on just client work, but on myself and my personal life as well, to understand where I'm at. And so if you look back over the last 10 months, what would you say your personal experience with the loss of Bob and going through the grieving and the reorganizing way that your nervous system is reorganizing, what has it taught you? Or where would you say were challenging moments, so that people also who listen to this can say, oh, okay, this is where I'm going through right now. And just to give a little bit of insight from your perspective, with the understanding, with the backdrop of polyvagal theory.
And in the moment of loss, I think was when my sympathetic system went into overdrive. That sort of all the things you have to do, and there's no time to feel or stop and slow down, because if I had slowed down, again, this is, my biology is doing it for me. My brain's then reflecting back and going, here's what was happening. So as I reflect back, sympathetic is the system that is, activating, energizing, mobilizing. It's that anger, anxiety, fight, flight. It also is the place that just keeps you going, 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 going. You're driven, right? And at the moment of his death, my sympathetic system went into overdrive, and it was all the things you have to do, because if you slow down, you're going to go to collapse, which is the other survival state that our nervous system takes us to. And my, sympathetic system said that can't happen. Right. My brain had no say in any of this, right? Because your biology simply takes over. Drive. And I got all the things done that had to be done. And then again, it was this for me, I was driven to declutter. I could not leave the house the way it was. It was filled with medical equipment. It was filled with all of the reminders of how hard it had been, especially in the last year. And I had to get it out. I was driven to get all of that out of the house. And again, thankfully, my daughter and son-in-law and grandsons, were happy to help. They understood grandma needs this. It's okay. And so they came and we did a big, declutter of the house, which allowed me to feel safe enough in the world to find a little bit of breathing space. Right. But it's that sense of feeling unsafe. Right. And some of your listeners may recognize the need to organize and declutter as a way to find some safety in the world. And that's what my nervous system needed. Right. And then I went from that to the drop into disappearing. I just needed to disappear from the world because, as again, with most people, when you suffer a loss, when someone dies, you enter into grief, the world reaches out to you often. Right. And I had an inbox that was filled with people sending me messages, people sending me articles, people sending me books, people sending me things, which is both lovely and overwhelming to my nervous system. For people who recognize the place of stepping back, disappearing, isolating, feeling no energy, that's a very, very familiar place to my nervous system. I call that my home away from home, right? It's where I go when the world is too much. So I went to that place and it was a very reassuring place for me. It doesn't nourish you in any way. It doesn't help you feel connected in the world, but it gets you out of that overwhelm of what's going on in the world. And that was a place that my nervous system took me to next. And again, had people around who understood that, which is so helpful. That, I think, is the place where most people who are in the grieving process have the most challenge, because the world around us does not think that's an okay place to be.
Exactly.
So if we can educate people that it's okay it's necessary, normal, and needed, right? And so
I guess also many people then find there's danger there. People stay too long, whatever the length is, right? And they say, we have to drag them out of this.
Yes. Yeah. And what's so interesting is the staying too long is really not about the person's nervous system who's in that place. It's about the other people's nervous system.
Yeah, exactly.
They are anxious. It's about their getting scared, not about, if we checked with the person who was in collapse, like my kids would check in with me and I would say, just need a day to just be, right? And they were fine with that. It's, what I discovered, and we know this from clinical work, but what I discovered at a personal level, I needed to know there was somebody there, but that they didn't want anything.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting combination. There are people there, but they're not asking anything of me. They don't want anything. They don't need anything. They don't need me to do anything. They're just there. That is such a gift to someone who's in a grieving place. So that was the gift that my family gave me. And then, I would begin to poke my head out and find ways of feeling, what is this new life going to be like?
Yeah.
Right. And I, might have a couple of days of, sort of organizing and feeling okay from a place of safety, from a place of, sadness, but with okayness, because you can be sad and okay.
Yeah.
Right? And so finding that sad and okay place, and I'd be there for a bit, and then I would go back into, super organizing drivenness or disappearing for a day or two. And it's that fluctuation that we do anyway, even in just normal life. We move through regulation, a bit of activation, a bit of disconnection all the time, right? But in the grieving process, I think it's magnified. And when you come to the place of feeling like you're sad and okay, and you're beginning to create a bit of what is this new life going to be, people get used to that. They like that. They think, oh, she's healing or recovering. She's back. And then you go back to the other states because that's what you're going to do. and the people around you get freaked by that sometimes. So we have to, again, it's about educating the people around us, right?
Yeah.
This is normal. And yes, I'm going to have days of feeling, ooh, I'm beginning to figure this out. And then I'm going to collapse, or then I'm going to be driven and, not make the best decisions, right? This is the normal experience of the nervous system. Yeah.
What also interests me is obviously you have a lot of clinical experience and probably also with people who were dealing with grief before Bob died. And I assume you also had losses before Bob. If we're looking at those people who are, you mentioned it a little bit, who might be, I have people that I can think of who say, even after 20 years, I'm still crying every day. Now, this is obviously just their description of it. I don't know what they're doing the whole day. But if we have people who are looking after those other people who are perceivably in a not good place for a lengthy period of time, what would you say that is in terms of the nervous system or response or states?
And I think we can get stuck in those dysregulated survival places, right? We know that. We know that from, working with trauma. Trauma happens not when you go to survival state, but when you get stuck there.
Yeah.
And I think the same is true with the grief journey, that the journey continues to unfold and you can get stuck somewhere. And if you're stuck, then you need some support in getting unstuck so that you can continue to navigate through times of okayness and times of not okayness. But when we get stuck in the survival so that we can't even find the moments of beginning to see the new life, then we need some help. And that help can be from a therapist who understands, who would journey with you through the lens of the nervous system. This would be my, what I would say, someone who's not necessarily wedded to certain stages of grief, but is, really looking with you. What is your nervous system wanting us to know right now? That's the question. The nervous system's trying to tell us something. So, and if, maybe you have people around you who can help you do that. It doesn't always have to be a professional, but, at times when we're really deeply stuck, someone who is knowledgeable and can look with you to answer that question. What is your nervous system missing in this moment? What is it telling you it needs? That I think is the pathway out, right? Yeah.
And what I also get a lot of comments or people then who are maybe stuck, let's call it that.
Yeah.
Some of these people have the belief that this will never change, or I need to be here, probably because of some coupling, I think, of pain equals love. But also I have certain clients in mind who say, this is never going to change. Nothing's going to help me. What would you say is that?
And again, that might be their dorsal system story, the story of despair. This will never change.
Yeah.
And that we can stay lost in that place. What I would love to help those people sort of feel into is that that's a biological state, right? And you have two other biological states that are available in your nervous system, because your nervous system is created with three states. You might be stuck in the state of despair, right? But biologically, there are two others, and we have ways we can dip a toe into them and see what happens. And it's that tiny little dip a toe in and see what happens that I think is so, so important. Those small moments, bring a tiny change, and that's all we're looking for. Yeah. And sometimes that hopelessness brings your sympathetic drivenness to life, because it gets you feeling alive again, not in a way that is regulating, but it gets you out of the despair.
Exactly.
And I know from my own experience, I can go from despair to driven to despair to driven, and I get stuck in that, that cycle that, oh my God, despair driven, right? When the nervous system again is simply trying to find a bit of okayness, of relaxation, of regulation, right? And again, I do think that having someone to accompany you on that journey is
Mm.
so incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
Somebody will go with you and can be a guide when you need, but will also just be there with you, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's how I see my role. I tell people and there's a beautiful word in German for that kind of being with. It's called accompanying grief. So
Yes.
it's someone that accompanies you in your grief along the way. And I'm there, but I don't need to fix or fade or make it better because the person is gone. I can never bring the person back. The solution that people usually want is not available. It's, as some people say, it's option B. So
Yeah.
one of
Yeah.
the things you said before, I also remember you were saying that when people in your grieving journey made comments or suggestion, there was always, not always, but certain moments that sort of elicited a response of no,
Yeah.
actually, I don't want that.
Right.
Would you like
Right.
to
Yeah.
say something
Yeah.
about?
Yeah. It's because for me, and probably for many people, we have a two-layered response. One is leave me alone. That's not what I need. And then there's also this, oh, I need to take care of them.
Yeah,
Right. So
yeah,
both things, it's like, oh, it can be, and you can feel very crazy,
yeah,
right? You can feel crazy just in the way your brain responds after, a loss anyway. And, you feel that brain fog, all of that going on. And of course, I'm 71 years old. And where does everybody in my age bracket go immediately when you feel, your brain's not working? You go to dementia and Alzheimer's, right? And so it was very reassuring to read books. I did read the Grieving Brain. Someone sent me that one. It was lovely. I did read that. It's like, oh no, it's okay. I'm just in a grief process. I'm not losing my mind. But
yeah,
it's helpful to have some of those, pieces of information, because you do think you're going crazy. I mean,
yeah.
Bob, for the last, many months of his life, would wake up many, many times in the night and need help. And he would yell my name, right?
Mhm.
And for many weeks after he died, I would wake up hearing him yell my name.
Yeah,
Very common, right? And I would think, oh my God, I've gone crazy. Or then I'd try to make up some, grand story about Bob is there somewhere. And it's like, oh my God, can I just be with it's what he did many, many months. And so it's, my nervous system is bringing that to life again. Right.
mhm. Yeah,
And if when I can ground in that, and then I can, explore any other story I want, any spiritual or anything I want, but I first had to ground myself in here's what my biology is doing.
yeah.
Right. For me, that's where I needed to start. And so those things happen, I think, for most people. We have these odd experiences that we are story making beings, and our brain is trying to make up a story to make some sense of what's going on, right? And the
Mhm.
story for me, was the most helpful was the story of my nervous system, right? And that may not be true for everybody. You may have a spiritual story or a different story that is more helpful for you, and underneath that story, your nervous system is still the foundation, is taking you into a state. So that's a both and that we want to bring in, right?
Mm.
Yeah, yeah,
So, I
yeah,
mean, in your case, you mentioned it's just a little bit over 10 months. And I think it's a good enough time to look back, especially with your background, but also your personal experience. And then in another 10 months, we would look at it in a different way. And that might be an interesting conversation as well. But looking back as well, where would you say you had moments where you found yourself really challenged, even though you had the underpinning of the nervous system understanding
yeah.
and trusting it will come back? There is also challenging moments.
Oh,
Maybe share a
yes,
little bit about that because
yeah,
people might be able to relate to that.
yeah. And I want to share some challenging moments in the last months of his life, because
Yeah.
this is something that people have a certain idea of me, because I am, a public figure, and I teach about regulation, and I'm regulated when I teach. So people would, email me afterwards after he died and would say things like, what a gift it was for Bob to have you as his caregiver at the end of life. And what I wanted to say back, and I'll say it publicly now, was, oh my gosh, there were so many messy moments,
Yeah.
right? So many messy moments. If you only had been here, you would look at me differently. You'd look at me as human,
Yeah.
right? Because I had a very human, there were moments when I was too tired, when my nervous system could not be in that place of safety and connection. And it was messy. It got done, but it was messy. And so, those were the really challenging moments for me. And as I look back, I'm still trying to, forgive myself, I think, for some of those times. I'll give you an example, because if I ever write a book, it's going to be Just Make the effing milkshake is this the title of it, because Bob would wake up at midnight often and want a milkshake. He loved milkshakes. So he'd wake me up from a sleep and want a milkshake. And there were many nights when I would say, Bob, it's midnight. What are you doing? Go to sleep. You can have a milkshake in the morning. And then other times when I would just make the milkshake, right? And looking back on it, my advice to anybody would be just make the milkshake. Just make the milkshake, because the person who's asking can't do it for themselves. And they have a longing for something. For Bob, it was a milkshake. And so, even as I think about it now, I can feel myself getting emotional about remembering the times I didn't make the milkshake.
Yeah.
Right, and wish I did. So just make the milkshake, or whatever it is, because yeah. So, there's that were the hard times. And then after Bob died, I think the hard times are more the private times of feeling sort of lost. I think untethered was a word that I used in talking. That untethered feeling is scary. Lost is sort of like I still have my feet on my ground, but I'm lost. But untethered is that floating. I don't even know where I am. I have no idea at all. And that those untethered times are challenging. They still come every now and then. When you think, you have sort of again, I'm 71. It's an interesting time of life anyway, to kind of think, what do I want to do with the time I have left, whatever that is. And then to all of a sudden be, unmoored, untethered, and along top of that is challenging. And so there's still messy moments. I'm better at recognizing them and being able to be with them, right? But they still come. I imagine so I imagine even if we, get together again 10 months from now, there still will be messy moments, because that's just part of the journey, I think. So
I think that's beautiful that you say that. And from my experience of, in my case, 12 years since my daughter died and 11 and a half years since my mother died from suicide, I can still, I see a longer period of time. And there's still moments that I think about it and I think, why did she die? And why did it happen? And then there's a whole range of different things that comes. And sometimes completely unexpected. There's nothing that triggers or activated, or not that I can see, but my biology remembers, and there's something that vibrates with that. And that's, I feel that's part of me, and it doesn't have to be forever gone. It's just like my mother's memory is always there. And part of that memory is her dying and her not being physically here.
Yeah, I love the unexpectedness of those moments. I'm beginning to expect the unexpected, sort of, right? That it's unpredictable. Someone showed me a picture the other day of someone who was important in their lives, and the male person had this big, strong arms, and there, I was just struck by that was the Bob that I met and fell in love with. He was this strong, and I felt his hug in that moment. I could feel it again, and it had been years and years and years, because stroke took all of that away anyway. But so again, it was that interesting, and it was a felt sense of a memory, an embodied memory of being held in his strong arms that just caught me off guard. So you're right. We never kind of know when our nervous system is going to remember a moment and bring it to life, which is both lovely and sometimes hard.
Yeah. But by you saying that, I also want to recognize this journey that you went through with Bob having a stroke and then needing caretaking, and what you just said of the time in between. There was also losses, and multiple losses that happened long before his physical death, which probably the realization, some of them were immediately clear, but then also, as you were just saying, you realized that did not happen for so many years because there wasn't a possibility, and yet the person is here and still wants a milkshake.
Yeah.
And so there's all these ambivalences and ambiguousness about the whole experience. The person is here, but part of that person or part of that relationship that you had was not being able to be lived.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk about reciprocity in relationships, right? And the nervous system, loves to give and receive, offer and give back, and that reciprocity equation that I, teach and work with, changed when Bob had his stroke, because there wasn't, usually a relationship comes back, leans the other way, and it's that leaning one way and the other, and then when Bob offered in all the ways he could, and yet it leaned more in one direction, after his stroke. So there are all these new things to get used to, and in order to really live the new way, you have to feel the loss of the old, right? You can't bring in a new without feeling the loss of the old. So it's a layered, multi-layered experience, isn't it? Grief and loss, the little losses and then the big loss. We recognize the big loss. People really, mark those big losses. Like, people showed up when Bob died to say, "I'm sorry." Along the way, they don't recognize that, travel. We had to travel differently. Everything was really hard. You couldn't, because it's harder to recognize those, I think. So maybe we can get better at helping, being with people, recognizing the little losses that
along the way,
painful as well.
Deb, this conversation is not finished, and yet I'm just also in mind of the time that people are used to in terms of the podcast episodes that I run. But I hope this is not our last conversation. I sort of put this hint out that, and I can't wait for you to, if you are there, to speak about more of what is my passion, the intersection, the interlinking of grief and trauma, because this is, to me, my grief experience were sort of the pivotal moments that made it clear for me where I am, even though I was working with grief before. But then when I fully understood, or started, not fully, but started to understand the traumatic part of it, I realized, okay, suddenly so much more made sense of what's happening for me personally, or what was happening, as well as for those that I have been supporting.
I think I just want to say that's the joy that we have, because we, the power of experiencing our own trauma, grief, loss, and being able to help others navigate theirs. I think it's to me that feels so important.
And to end, I want to echo what you said right at the beginning of the experience, your personal experience, the layer of depth, or the depth of understanding that it gave you. When I lost my daughter, I was like, oh my God, how could I help people before? They felt help, they felt supported, but my personal experience gave me such a different depth that is not just a couple of study terms more. It's just a completely different experience that you can't learn by reading books or taking courses. Well, thank you so much for the conversation so far, and I hope this again won't be the last. But as I always end with my guest, is by asking a couple of questions, the rapid fire questions. Shall we do that now?
Sure.
So grieving and trauma means?
Means my nervous system is struggling to find a new way to organize.
And healing means?
Finding the new pathway.
And what would you say you have learned about yourself in the light of loss and trauma?
Oh, it's been a humbling experience. I've learned that I am messy in moments, very messy in moments. And I'm also strong in moments. And patience is a growing edge of mine. I'm not always the most, yeah, maybe that's your next question, but I need to learn to stop and just take a breath before taking an action. Yeah.
I think many people, including myself, would sign up for that. But what would be one specific thing that you wish people would know about loss and trauma, maybe especially in terms of your understanding of the vast understanding of polyvagal principles?
Yeah, I wish people could understand the basics of their nervous system, that our nervous system is always trying to help us survive, and doing it in ways that may seem crazy in the moment, but there's a biological underpinning. And if we can appreciate the biology and trust that our nervous system will get us back to a place of regulation and on the new path, then I think, we'll navigate the journey better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those people who are just listening, they don't see me nod, didn't see me nod.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely clear for me now that I teach clients or am in supported through my courses that that's the basic for them to understand where they're at. So the last question is, what would be one specific thing that has changed since the loss of Bob that you wouldn't want to miss?
I think I wouldn't want to miss this sense of this new sense of purpose in my life. Right, my purpose, before was really in balancing, taking care of Bob and teaching in the world, because Bob was so important to me. And now that he's no longer here, I have a new sense of purpose in wanting to introduce curious humans to their nervous system, and I have the freedom to do that now, so I don't want to miss that. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a gift that I'm glad to be looking forward to, your presence in the world, to be having more curious people understand themselves from that point of view. Well, thank you so much, Deb. It's been such a pleasure and honor for me to be having this time for me and for us with you.
It truly has been a joy. Thank you for all of the questions, because it's been a lovely moment of reflection for me in a way that was really helpful and important. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nataliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.